Hello and welcome everybody to the Age 92 pre-age chat for the World of Legends on utopiagame.com. Today I'm joined with persaincat and a few members of the community. persaincat was one of the leaders in creating these changes and balancing the entire system, so we really look forward to what he has to say regarding the changes and how they're going to affect Utopia this age. Thank you, persaincat, for joining us, and everyone who's in the chat from the community. I hope you enjoy this discussion. So persaincat, tell us a little bit about what you do in the Changes Council, and what made you kind of want to make such large changes to the game that clearly have already impacted so many people, according to the chat comments that we've seen so far since proposed changes have been released. Tell us a little bit about it.
So I'm normally in the change committee and I read through and help with the balancing, and Hex takes the lead, and then we all kind of give input, say what looks broken, what looks strong, just general giving things. But there was a discussion in chat saying, it'd be nice to kind of mix things up. And I said, well, if you actually just let me take the handle of things, I have several ideas that I could try and take a theme to and just give us some big mix-up. I mean, normally we used to have kind of major changes every 3 ages, then it went to every 4 ages, and then it had been a while, so it's like, okay, well, let's take some major changes. So when I got the okay to do that, I went and said, okay, what's possible to be coded in? What things can't be done? Like, things like, if you have more horses, your attack goes faster. No. Things like, if you send more offensive specs versus your elites, maybe your gains change. It's like, maybe, but that's not easy. So it's like, okay, what things can I start hacking off that don't work? And then once I got a list kind of in theory of what didn't work, it's like, okay, well, how about then instead we have just the races and the personalities? Since that's a standard thing, how about we just go all races? And if we went all races, basically you can slot in each of the races into a role. So I took, okay, Avian, you have a speed attacker, Dwarf is your tank attacker, Dryad was your just massive offense, nothing else. Orc hits really hard, has big gains, Undead has sustain, Human has always kind of been based around science a little bit. Your elf or dark elf always focused on magic, so it's like, okay, let's make one kind of an attacker mage focus, one just a pure mage. Fairy has been your standard thief mage, so let's kind of gear it towards nothing special focus, but it can go thief, it can go magic. Halfling and gnome were always both thief focused, so let's go with Halfling being your normal thief, Gnome being your attacker thief. And then I looked at Boken and said, okay, Boken was honor-based. Well, I can't really balance something that's purely honor-based because it's going to either scale to the moon when you have honor or into nothing when you don't have honor. So let's leave Boken off for now and just balance around these roles that each race has fit in. If you knock out all the personalities and take all the personality mods and distribute them across the races, each race can each of the personalities. Yeah, I mean, you've gone from 81 options, 9 races, 9 personalities, to now you have 121 options, with 11 of those being double because, Avian Dwarf is the same thing as Dwarf Avian. So you've gone from 81 to 110. So even if a large portion of these are not really an option that you can take, you still have as many choices in the past.
Wonderful. That's very insightful, persaincat. I think that'll help explain to some of the community, the reasoning behind the changes and why we're trying to freshen things up a little bit. But one question I had, the special system regarding the hybrid vigor and pure of blood, where the hybrid vigor gets 50% BR, whereas the pure blood only gets the races penalties once, and they also get town watch. That's still a thing, right?
Yeah, it's still a thing, and that's that's the other thing. The main focus being finally how you manage your resources has always been a thing. So the war that I was just in that just ended, I personally screwed up our declare. I screwed up the first major wave. Yet we had 4 thief mages that were unconquestable, and even with the enemy having a dragon on us, they went 10 for 70 casting on us, and we had 35-40% watchtowers on our thief mages, so they weren't doing any real damage via thievery. And these 4 thief mages can basically carry the whole war when they're just untouchable, running 20,000 peasants on 3,000 acres. I mean, you get to the point where we knew how to use our resources more than they did, and we had a few provinces that were just stronger, that it doesn't matter that we're down 40% acres at one point. I mean, we still had the chance to get our guys to carry the kingdom, and that's because my kingdom was putting in the time, was micromanaging everything, and knew how to use their resources correctly. While I got the feeling that the enemy, while they were good, they weren't able to coordinate their resources as well.
Yeah, and that's just it. It really comes down to play style, your kingdom, the way it's set up, and the way you want your kingdom to run throughout the age. It comes down to whether you're warring, whether you're just going for a growth or net worth crown, or whether maybe you're just trying to war to snag that honor crown, and you don't even care about war wins, because there are ways to snatch up honor without taking those war wins. The same with land and net worth. It all comes down to, as you said, resource management and the way you deploy your armies. It's a huge factor, and I think everyone's so concerned about what the best combinations are. They're forgetting that this game just isn't about min-maxing. It's about having a good time and enjoying the province that you're playing, not turning the game into like a work scenario.
And that's the perfect example, because you end up with having a lot of choices, but having some glaring holes in every choice you have is fine. Because what the goal of the game for everyone should be to have fun, not to min-max their providence that they're literally the strongest person in the game. Because when everything is said and done, everyone in the game knows that there's a couple kingdoms that are better, a couple kingdoms that are worse. No matter how you view your own self, I mean, I'm not going to claim I'm anywhere near the best, but no matter how you view your own self, the goal is to have fun, and the goal is to have a setup that works for your kingdom. I've had setups in the past where I know this was a stronger setup than the setup than the enemy I was facing. However, the level of micro needed was that every single person in my kingdom needed to be operating perfectly, or the holes in that setup would just have us get crushed. And in the past, we've gotten crushed. So my own kingdom always picks suboptimal setups such that the setup complements our players and we have fun. We often win because each player then is playing to their own strength versus playing to a setup that is technically better.
Thank you for sharing that information about your kingdom. I hope that others can take that away from this podcast and apply it to their own Utopia game. Maybe it'll help relieve some of the stress that they're experiencing in their work-life balance when it comes to playing Utopia at the same time as, when you are leadership and monarch, it can be very taxing and time-consuming depending on the level of play you're hoping to achieve for that age. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about was, what about these elite net worth values? Like, I know a lot of players have been questioning the validity of these changes and, why you would do something like this. Can you tell us a little bit more about that one?
So that was actually the one thing I was hoping that a lot of people would give feedback on. And I actually asked for feedback on that, because the standard way to calculate elite values of assign them and then use their those assigned that net worth as part of the tweaking doesn't really work when you have two race choices. It's just, there's no way, unless you literally give the matrix and you balance that entire matrix of elite net worth, there's no easy way to pick an elite net worth. So the initial thinking was, well, if the elite is just straight based and no efficiency based on how many points you get, your elite then is going to be very, very heavy net worth and is going to be this thing that just means chaining is going to be nearly impossible, because somebody who's 1,500 acres is never going to be in net worth range of someone who starts at 3,000 acres when there's a chain, because there's all this net worth in elites that are out there. So to mitigate that a little bit, the thought is, okay, well, let's give some net worth efficiency to elites to kind of encourage them. And I started playing with it and trying to balance around that. And I got some relatively nice numbers, being about 85%. The problem was that all of the hybrids that you would want to do are carrying a lot of net worth because they need both offense and both defense. The whole point of a hybrid is you make a strategic hit, when open yourself up, and then you turtle again. And that's the only real way to play attacker mage. It's the only real way to play attacker thief. If you just chain with those races, you dilute your mods too quick, and you're not even going to be able to night strike an attacker that only grew maybe 60% of what you grew. So there's no real way to balance, just give it some net worth efficiency. So I started asking around and asking other players, okay, what's the right way to balance the elites? And I got back, and so there's no reason other than the rest of the net worth that your kingdom is carrying, your providence is carrying, but your actual providence, the actual elite point on your primary stat isn't scaled. But then your secondary stat is giving you that extra benefit. So if you take that extra benefit and you scale the net worth of that very low, then that there's almost no net worth to that secondary stat. And so I took that and I started playing with, okay, what if that secondary stat was half net worth? What if it was a fifth of the net worth? And started messing with, how does this affect the offense and defense of a fairy versus an avian? How about a double gnome versus a fairy, or a double gnome versus a double dryad? How does that actually affect the ability to be unbreakable? And what I found was your hybrids are slightly more advantaged and slightly closer to being unbreakable when you use this kind of formula, and you use it at about, I was getting about 2.8, 2.9. So I just said, I'm just going to choose an easy number and go with 3. And I found that, okay, this actually makes hybrids a little bit more viable. And that's why it ended up with that.
Wow, that's a very interesting explanation of that, and definitely insightful. I think the community will definitely appreciate that. And I mean, yeah, going back to elites versus D specs or O specs, things like that. I think a lot of people don't put very much emphasis on net worth when they look at their warring situations. I like to look at the whole kingdom as a net worth brackets. I pick certain ranges, and everyone falls within those ranges, and it's my job as the war leader to dominate those brackets and put my brackets on top of theirs. I hope that makes sense to everyone. But one thing, going back to elites versus D specs, for instance, it's very common, and something I've done many times is sit my rogues, like my half of rogues, very low on the net worth scale, at the very bottom of the kingdom, but they have the highest defense. Elf, for example, Elf Rogue would be a perfect example of that, because they get that extra D spec value usually, and so that works in their favor to keep their net worth low and keeps rogues out of range at the bottom of the net worth tier. But also, they're basically unbreakable, but at the bottom, I don't see that being used very often.
Yeah, but also going back to the elites, one of the things you mentioned was the perfect example was if somebody just stacks defense specs, like when Elf does that. That was actually something I was playing with incorporating, was all these races have your mods to the elite, would make sense if they modded your offense spec and defensive spec as well. And I tried playing with that, and I got a spot that looked kind of balanced, but when I went to David, and it's like, okay, as far as how much stuff can get fucked up when it comes to coding, is this something that's going to mess it up? And he said, this is something that might screw up, so let's stay away from that for an age. So that's not something that won't be coming in the future, and if I'm balancing, I would still push for that, but that's why we didn't end up with messing around with specs, for example, this age is keep the game in a functional manner such that the mods are what we already have, things that don't break, things that just work.
Yeah, it's a good point. We ultimately want the game to stay as unbroken as possible, and be able to start the age with everything that was promised and put into the changes working 100%. Nobody likes when a few days in someone notices something's not working and it seriously impacted maybe the start of their age, or possibly even their out of protection war, or their protection period altogether. Let's look a little bit at kingdom setups. I mean, typically we see pretty standard setups. I mean, usually it's either heavy attacker with a sprinkling of TMs, either AT or AM. Sometimes kingdoms like to make it extra complicated and have all three facets. Have your attackers, have your mages, and then have your thieves in their little groups respectively, ultimately taking away from your attack core. But there's variations to all of that. You could have an entire TM-based kingdom, an entire attacker kingdom. All have been seen before. Science is popular in that regard, so human might be a nice 25 kingdom 25 player kingdom to run with.
Exactly. A standard setup is going to be run 10 undead orcs because they don't need science, they don't need honor, but they can get science real easy via learn. They get real big gains, and when you're attacking for land, they don't have anything. So there's your 10 attackers. Run, I don't know, say 4 elf fairies for meteor showers, 4 dark elf fairies for nightmare as your heretics. Run 4 halfling, run 4 halfling fairies as your rogues. Okay, now you need 3 open to do whatever you want. I would personally probably slot in something like a dryad dwarf or something, so I have some kind of tanky attacker that can do self spells on others. And now you've got all the rolls you need, and you're good to go. But I mean, again, that setup has weaknesses because your dark elf fairy can't night strike, so you're now running a crappy attacker thief mage that's casting your nightmares and doing all your kingdom intel. But that's a standard setup. You got a whole bunch of thief mages, you got a whole bunch of really strong attackers, a few of these kind of hybrid things mixed in the fairy dark elves and the dryad dwarfs or something, and you can't really go wrong with those kind of setups. What starts being fun is when you start saying, okay, I want to run a dryad fairy because I want to be able to have access to every spell and be able to attack and have magic. I want to run a gnome orc because I'm going to just go nuts and have massive gains and massive conversions and generate all the credits I'll need. So I just go and hit out. Heck, you can run a really easy setup to run is like human dwarf. Talk about being tanky. You got all this science, really hard to op you, and when everything is said and done, you don't have a very bad elite. So there's a whole bunch of options that you can run in there, and nothing that really is something like running, I don't know, in the past you ran like fairy cleric. It's like, okay, fairy cleric does what? It's fairy that attacks but doesn't really have any benefit but sustains a little bit better. There's always going to be these options that are like, why are you running that? But in this kind of situation now, you're just going to have to accept that every setup you choose has some hole, be it that you're going with the pure blood and you don't have a lot of variety, or you're going with a big variety but you have glaring weaknesses.
Yeah, exactly. And we want the game to be fun for everybody. And again, just because it's not the most optimal playthrough, it's still going to be a fun playthrough, and it's going to be helpful to your kingdom at the end of the day. With the changes with regards to player retention and new players, and of course life balance. We want to try and keep the game as fun as possible. Kingdoms haven't been around for a long time in their state, and it's hard to keep players engaged for as long as Utopia has been around. It's been quite a long time, and everyone's life, changes. But of course, we want to keep everyone engaged and also make changes that are relevant and, also give it a bit of a twist. Because at the end of the day, we want to keep it Utopia as well. That's I think really important to Utopia as a whole, since especially since David's taken over. We want to keep it as close to what everyone knows as Utopia.
I started age 8, for example, and I've got half my kingdom started pre-age 10. So I know that exact feeling. I mean, the balances and all the changes. The aim was not only just for something fun, but to keep Utopia as close to Utopia as it can be, while still making something that felt like a drastic change. And while plenty of people are going to complain and plenty of people are going to say, nope, I'm done, I'm not having fun, or this isn't my game anymore, this is your vision, not my vision. The game changes. I tried to keep the concepts as minimal as possible as far as changing, but introducing something new. So I just ask that everybody try and just have fun this age. We can balance more going forward. We can see where things go, but the goal is to keep Utopia and just tweak things up a little bit.
Thank you so much for that, Persian Cat. I want to take a moment to open up the floor to any questions that anyone currently might have at this time.
I did have a question regarding the dragons, what you foresee, and you said a lot of dragons, but can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I was looking at dragons, and I'm looking at my past wars, and I'm looking at dragons have a lot of hit points, and cost a lot. So if someone has 80 million gold and you have 10, late age, you're looking at, okay, maybe I'll get half a dragon funded. They're going to instantly fund and send a dragon that they've already funded pre-war. And if they're any kind of active, they can probably send and fund 80% of the next one. I might get enough gold off of them to fund my first one, fake gold a little bit of them, but I'm down 2-to-1 dragons, and it's just because they started with more money. So instead of making these dragons these really hard hitting things that are just, I need an insane amount of money to fund, we've increased spec elite values, so you're going to have more spec credits. We've increased End of War Ceasefire, so you're going to have more gold. So instead of making these dragons really expensive and scaling them based on our new values, how about I just cut their cost? Now we have a whole bunch of dragons that are really easy to kill because they have the hit points based on your net worth, assuming the 8 to 10 point elite, and now your elites are 15 to 20. But their cost is halved. So now every dragon is like sending a mini dragon, and the goal then is for you to fund them during war. And it negates this huge stockpile of gold, because what are you going to do? Send me 6 dragons? You can send me 1, and if I know you have the gold for 6 more, I'm just going to wait it out. I'm going to fake gold all your gold, wait a day or 12 hours until you've tapped out your gold, then I'll kill 2 dragons, and now we're relatively even again. The goal being then that now we get to fight more relatively uneven terms based on our starting gold, and the game has gone to a very econ in war shift. And the fun thing is, it allows me to send Emerald Dragon number 1, Sapphire Dragon number 2. If I think you're going to tank it forever because you can't really kill it, maybe I send the Amethyst Dragon and I hit your science, such that your science is starting to decay over time. That was actually one of the bigger changes. Basically, week 6 on, it never seemed reasonable to send anything other than an amethyst. If somebody's running science enough to run 40% housing, I hit you for 25% of your science, you instantly lost 10% of your population. There is never a reason to send a different dragon than that. And now there is, because it barely does a little bit, but it's going to be affecting you only if you tank it a really long time. Why would you not send a science dragon first? So if you think they can kill it instantly, and you don't have the ability to send multiple dragons, I would probably send emeralds first, just because that costs them the most to kill. The amethyst dragon is nice, but you're still only talking about 4% science loss if they don't kill it in the first 5 hours. I mean, that's not a great amount of science that you're going to be decayed tanking it as a first dragon for a little bit. Any other questions?
I'll ask something if that's all right. Why the move to extend the end of War Ceasefire this age versus keeping it the same? Is just because of so many drastic changes? You wanted to give more time and recoup, or?
So honestly, what it amounts to is a lot of people got burnt out this age. When I start reading through people talking and people, just the general complaints, a lot of people were very tired. And the extra day allows an extra day of recovery where everyone kind of just relaxes, gets their providence ready to recover, and then saves up the money. The advantage that this past age had a little bit more is that specs were a little bit more viable to be converting over time. But with the ability to have plus and minuses of specs onto your race personality, you basically are going to need very much to train your elites. So stressing people trying to get the elites trained in 72 hours, recover in 72 hours, pump WPA, pump science, just all of that, and the general tiredness that people had. I mean, you're welcome to still leave in 72 hours, but that extra hour provides that extra little bit of recovery kingdoms need.
What the Warbirds in the Warwind Kingdom, how many war totals did they have? Was it 8? Or 9?
I think they were only at 7 or 8. My kingdom hit 6. We normally hit 5, so we got in 1 extra this age.
7.
So, sorry, what?
So we hit 7.
Yeah. So I mean,
I think we ended rank 7 in Warwinds with 7.
Yeah, I mean, you're always welcome to leave End of War Ceasefire early. That's the one thing people never really think about. Is I know the extra day is an extra day for everyone, but if you really need that, I want to get as many wars, come out on pumped a little bit, especially with the changes allowing for that to be a little bit more econ focused in war. If you come out early,
burnout,
yeah,
and because it's like, well, I have to have 8 wars or push 8 wars, as opposed to having this will probably cut 1 full war, because I'm pretty sure people will take that extra day just because of I mean, the most obvious is you get more wizards on your acreage.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I know for the vast majority of the people that I was getting when I was, because I mean, I literally went and this age because I was doing the changes. I started working on the changes about a month ago as the concept, and then about 3 weeks ago, I started actually formulating things into the precursor to what everybody sees, and reading every single comment in Wool and the discussions, and then all the strategy stuff, and trying to read all the comments to see what people's complaints were and what people's thoughts were. That 1 extra war, a lot of people like, but I was reading a lot of people being very tired. And so I thought, especially without having, with the need to pump elites via this setup, going back to 4 days was a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, and when it comes down to 4-day ceasefire and sitting and mentoring, that's a very common thing, especially in the warring kingdoms. Talk about having those precise waves go off without a hitch. It's very important that everyone's on the same page, and of course, the less communication links you need, that is, the less players you have to communicate with, the easier it is to make those plans. If you have like half your kingdom on point, ready to run the core, but they're also your TMs, you're going to have a very effective team running that wave because you only have to communicate orders with your most highly skilled and active players who already know what's going on, and it definitely makes it a lot easier. But it also, on the flip side, helps newer players or struggling players understand a little bit better about what they should be doing, because they can have their province taken over and basically, kind of guided through how to play the game. So it's definitely useful, and I think everyone likes to use it. I definitely like to use it, and of course, with regards to the ceasefire, it helps when you have a Monday to Friday job and a family, and that way, if you're planning correctly, you could have all your wars start on Friday nights, ending Monday mornings, something like that, and not have your next war until Friday evening. I mean, it's perfect for that. This age, my kingdom really struggled with the 3-day ceasefire. Not because there wasn't enough time to pump, but just because there just wasn't enough time to do all the planning necessary for the level of play that was expected, by the entire kingdom. You know, for one person to be doing by themselves. I think it's an important change for everybody in terms of, again, going back to the work life and
We
utopian
sat a
balance.
lot for sure. We had a
Yeah,
lot of sits. They weren't long sits, but there were a lot of, 6 hour overnight sits.
yeah. My kingdom usually has about 8 to 10 people sat at
Yep.
any point,
Yeah.
given point in time in a war, and our wars usually last between 4 to 6 days. So our kingdom is almost always in war, except one 6 to 8 day gap somewhere mid-age.
I'll be
So
honest, I have no idea what I'm fairly new to the game. I just happened to get put into I guess, a pretty decent kingdom. So I still don't know anyone.
well,
One thing I think that used to be around was the win loss used to be posted on every kingdom's page, and now we just have a win amount and the war score to identify, of course, the new ranking system that the wars are based on. However, I think it would be nice to see that back there again. I really don't think it is too detrimental. To the kingdoms who were kind of not so great, because at the end of the day, the top end kingdoms still have access to the same dump file that everybody does and that I have posted on the news website. So there's definitely some of the mysticism has been taken away from that if you look deep enough. But that's something that maybe could get added back to the game in the future. But at the end of the day, it still works without it. So, I mean, how important is that to everybody? I think that's yet to be
How
determined
difficult
still.
is it to put that in, to add that in, do you think?
it was made to stop people from vulturing bad kingdoms. So it's not obvious
Okay.
now if you're just a bad kingdom or if you just don't war a lot, and that's generally a good thing. And so age 91 rankings are up. Templars had 5.85 points, so I would say they had 6 wins or 6 to 7 wins, because my kingdom had 5 wins, ended up 4.54. The kingdom that we surrendered to right at the end of age had 6 wins and was 4.45. So Templars would have had 6 or 7 wars that they had. Same with Warbirds.
Yeah, it was a really close last couple of days there for the War Crown, that's for sure. At this moment, I'd like to conclude the discussion. I thank everyone for joining and for the questions, of course. Thank you so much, Persian Cat. Thank you so much for the great age we have ahead of us and all the feedback and information you provided during this podcast. We definitely look forward to having you on some more of the Warcasts going forward. Crowns or banner crowns will be given to all the winners. as well as the theme crown. So you can expect to see those shortly. Of course, the Warcast will be done for the pre-age with Smiles and Saps coming very soon, and everyone can look forward to that. Of course, we're going to be doing that once a week if possible, maybe even more often than that. And of course, I'll be running the newspaper throughout the age. Of course, not during year zero. There will be some setup time, of course, to get everything going. Again, thank you so much for everyone who's listening to the podcast, who participated during the live version of the podcast. We greatly appreciate your feedback